Typography is a really important part of motion graphics, and we see it a lot in a lot of the pieces that we study and look at. That it's used a lot into really I consider two contexts, right? So you can have narration and have the typography follow along with the narration in order to emphasize something a lot more. That's a really common technique in order to really push a point across this. So if I'm talking about, it's the best, greatest thing ever, I could have some text up here that is moving or really underlining that point for me, and it's snapped right to the timing of what I'm saying, so that it really pushes that point for me. So that's one context in which it's used. But also we see typography used also when there isn't a voiceover, or when it's trying to talk to something that the voiceover is not talking to. That's another instance where we might use typography in motion graphics in order to get something across. So sometimes things don't have a voiceover, and you're left with that constraint, so you have to really communicate something well with typography. So we'll get into talking about some very basic things that you do with typography in After Effects. Some of you have probably already played with this over the course of just tinkering around the last couple weeks. And what we will do is we'll cover how to deal with typography in general, and really the rules apply from Illustrator and Photoshop. That a lot of the same rules apply. So I'm not going to get into all of the things about kerning and tracking and all that stuff. That's all stuff that you can pursue on your own time, or that's all stuff that a lot of you have already learned already by studying typography in a foundations course. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to jump in and we're going to talk about how to animate certain aspects of typography. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to select the text tool. So you can select the horizontal text, or you can select vertical text, or rather vertical type. Most of the time you're using horizontal type, but sometimes you may want to do it vertically for something different. Another important thing that I recommend pulling down is the character panel and the paragraph panel. So you can find those from Windows, like we're used to doing. Underneath here you can find the character panel and the paragraph panel. And really, since paragraph isn't directly on top, it wasn't showing there, but you can go ahead and you can hide it underneath. I like to, take them and anchor them here and then hide one right underneath of the other, right? So I can switch back and forth between character and paragraph. So the character panel, we're used to this right now. It tells you the size, it tells you the leading, and it also tells you, how far apart the letters are, etc., etc. The length, the width, all that good stuff. The height and the width, all that good stuff. But also the paragraph tells you the justification, right? So right now I'm left justified. Maybe I want my text to be center justified, right? So this is all stuff that you can look at on your own time. Indentation, all that stuff. So this is if you're doing large paragraphs of text, then which probably you don't want to do too much of that with motion graphics, but large paragraphs of text, this stuff is really going to come in handy. For characters, though, let's stick to the character panel and take a look at some of the features there. So I'm going to go ahead right now and I can click directly into my composition, which is, this is pretty straightforward, right? Maybe I want to type a message, EMDA 342. Now I see here for my paragraph that it's center justified, right? So this is an object like anything else. It's a layer, and it comes in here in a timeline as a layer. And as you've noticed, we can pull down the transform properties of it. Yeah, so all these different attributes like the position, the scale, all that stuff. That's all stuff that we can manipulate, right? So something to take into account. You can scale text with the scale option, or you can just adjust its natural sizing right here if you want. So that's just really something to keep in mind when you're working, is two different ways to adjust that. You can also do the tracking, which is a popular thing to do. Of course, I have to select that first before I do the tracking. So you can space the letters closer, further together. That's something that's commonly done, right? So you can even do backwards tracking, which can be interesting sometimes depending on the effect. So we're pretty familiar with the aspect of animating particular keyframe properties here, right? So I can always have this, just as an example, I can always have this just zoom in, right? And keep in mind that text or vectors in or typography comes into After Effects as vectors. So right now we're dealing in vector space. So obviously I can have this just zoom up here and have that look good or have it look zippy, right? So and I could do it. It follows all the same rules that everything else does. So say I have this and I want it to have motion blur on it, right? So I can apply motion blur to it. I can change the color of it, right? So we haven't really talked much about that yet, but you can use this color palette up here to change the color. I like, I don't know, I kind of like this color here. Looking pretty good. And then right now it says Open Sans, which I'm having a little trouble believing that this is Open Sans. Actually, it is Open Sans. Okay, good. And I can change the font, right? So I can change it to Open Sans Regular. I can change it to Open Sans Light. That kind of thing. So always keep in mind when you're working with typography what the endpoint's going to be. Legibility, in my mind, in my opinion, from having worked on things, legibility is just key to good typographic design if you're going to be doing marketing or you're communicating a point. If you're doing something that's a little bit more you're doing something that's a little bit more for expression or artistic, and maybe legibility is not what you're after, but for the most part when it comes to marketing you have to make it legible, which means don't make it too small, don't make it too thin, right? So right now I'm working with light typography and or a light version of this font. It is large enough that it'll work really well, right? But the thing you really need to just be careful for is if you're going to be converting this down to a DVD or one of those older formats, you just have to be careful that the scan lines that come across a conventional standard definition television set don't eat up your typography. So if I were to take this and make it really, really, really small, right, like this size, and then put it on a standard definition television, you wouldn't be able to read this because the scan lines would be distorting this and eating it up, which it's not a very easy concept to visualize. It's something you have to make as a mistake, and then you realize, oh yeah, I really should have done that a different way. So right now I've kind of got that, I've got this centered, and I can go ahead and I can apply all of those same tools that we know and love that we've worked with before. I can keyframe it. But one of the things that really makes this distinct too is making this stay up on the screen for a reasonable amount of time before you swipe it off. That's another thing that comes with legibility. You have to be able to read, especially in design, when it comes to design, you have to be able to read it properly before you swipe it off of the screen, right? So I just want to make sure that you're always previewing, you're always checking, you're always testing to make sure your audience can actually read what you're putting up there, which I know you're saying, oh, well, duh, I know that. But you'd be really surprised that once you start designing and you get attached to a particular idea, you'd be really attached to an idea to the point where it fights against the legibility or the function of what you're doing. So we'll get into maybe discussing that a little bit more in class, but let's go ahead and preview this and see if it's legible, right? Yeah, I can read that, right? So you should be able to read it once. Preferably, you should be able to read it maybe twice. If it doesn't have voiceover to go with it, you really should be thinking about whether or not you can read it over 1.5 times or 2 times before it goes flying off of the screen, right? So that's something you could do. You can also maybe do it this way and then have it, instead of flying upwards, maybe you can have it fly sideways, right? Look, and there's our interpolation there that's going to give us a little bit of trouble. There we go. So I can go ahead and I can add it over here, right? So I can have it come up from the bottom and then fly off to the side. Real zippy like that, right? Pretty simple, right? So that's the basics of working with typography as a whole. Now we're going to discuss ways that you can manipulate individual letters, which I know some of you may have been really chomping at the bit to learn how to do. So we're going to talk about that now. A lot of us have seen typography where the individual characters have been manipulated or animated, and I'm sure at this point, now that we've just shown you that you can animate the text as a block, you're probably asking, well, okay, how do I animate the individual letters? It's not incredibly intuitive, so we're going to walk through that and look at how that's done. But for the time being here, I'm actually going to take this, I'm going to get rid of these keyframes here just so I have a static image now, right? So it's not animated. The whole block itself is not moving. We don't really want to add too much confusion in here. So with my typography selected, my typography layer selected, let's roll that up. so that we're just looking at it this way. We apply animators to our pieces of text, and this is how we can actually get at the individual letters within a piece of within a typography layer. So I'm going to go up to animation here, and I'm going to go to animate text, and what this will do is this will actually add a text animator on top of my typography layer. So hang with me here. Say for example, let's think of a desired effect we want. Maybe instead of having the whole word come in this way and then fly out that way, maybe I want the letters to come in individually from the bottom and then fly out individually from the right hand side. So we can easily do that with a typography animator. So I'm going to go to animation, and I'm going to go to animate text. And since we want to animate the individual position of each character, we're going to actually pull down position, but these should look familiar. You can rotate individual letters, you can do all sorts of things. You can alter the tracking, right? So you can make letters look like they're coming together or coming apart. So there's all different kinds of things, and something to play with here. Character value and character offset, these are different ways that you can get that get some of that high-tech looking scrolling text stuff. That's typically how it's done with character value and character offset. The flashing computer cursor prompt, which I've done a zillion times for clients. That's typically done here, through these two tools down here. But for the time being, we're just going to talk about position, and we're just going to look at it very basically how we can get individual letters to do this, and then you can follow on and play with these different effects. So I'm going to pull down a position animator, and we've noticed that it adds a particular animator to our typography layer. So now we actually have a different thing that we can twirl down and work with, which is pretty interesting here. So it has a position value. So let's keep in mind, this is also very important here, the range selector and the actual position value. So the position value is really how you want this to either start out or end up. I mean, you could take it from either direction, but right now we're centered on the screen, and we want each individual letter to come up from the bottom. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to take this position value here that's underneath the animator, and I'm actually going to move it down. So that in and of itself, you said, well, you just moved the whole thing off of the page. Yeah, I did, but the nice part here is that I have what's called a range selector. The range selector covers, it says, okay, how much of this piece of typography, how much of this one chunk of text is going to be covered by this one effect? Well, right now we start at 0 and we end at 100. Well, watch as I slide this back. You're noticing I'm changing the range of selection. So right now, it's going from 0 to 0. So none of these are being affected by the position property that I have here. So there's different ways that you can do this. And really, the thing you're animating, you're not animating the position, which this is the tricky part, the gotcha part. The position itself is not actually what you'll be animating. You'll actually be animating the range selection, right? So what if I started like this, and this might take me a couple of times to kind of heuristically get, right? So that's the effect that we want. We want it to read from left to right, which is proper. So I'm actually going to set the full range up to be hiding the text underneath, and then I'm actually going to animate the range selector. So I'm going to start. I'm going to set up the start keyframe to be 0, and then I'm going to move that over here so it's at the beginning. And then I'm actually going to set it up so that it does the full range selection from here to here. So now we actually managed to bring the text in one letter at a time, right? And really, we may want to bring that down a little bit so that we don't get that blur at the bottom there. So let's see what that looks like. So there we go, and it was really fast, right? So so we get a lot of motion blur in it, and it looks like that rather kind of a slapstick sort of an effect, right? So something to be mindful of. Something else that is worth looking at here with your range selector is that you can go ahead and you can do advanced things. For example, smoothness is something that is that you can do. You can set it up to not be smooth, right? So right now it's not interpolating between what these range values are, which it's just something you have to play with to understand how it works. I mean, I could explain it to you, but it might be a little bit, it might take me a little while to kind of explain exactly how it works. But the smoothness of something is something to play around with, and you'll notice that we want to keep the smoothness high if we want to show it, a lot of change in there. And really, I'm going to slow that down a little bit so that we can see a little bit more of the letters. So smoothness is something underneath of advanced that you can tweak. The ease high and the ease low is something else that you can tweak, right? So we talked about easing, right? So ease high, probably not what we want. I believe ease low is probably the thing that we want. Hang on here. Yeah, you get different effects here, so it's worth playing around with. Another thing you could do is randomize the order. So that's a fun thing to do, right? Just by flipping this switch on down here to randomize the order, you can go ahead and you can randomize the order that they come in at. So that's kind of fun, and that's a nice little built-in whistle there. We can change bells and whistles. We can go ahead and change the random seed. So, I don't like the way that looks. Maybe I want to randomize a different way. And this is where we get talking about different random seeds and all the like, which we don't have really time to cover. But here you go. You can go ahead and you can give yourself any number of fun options there. So I've checked that to on or off, and so anyhow, that gives you a pretty good idea of how you can manipulate individual pieces of text. So I pulled down a position animator, but there's all different kinds of other animators that you can put on here. It's in order to make the text fly out the other side, which I haven't forgotten about our goal here. I can actually take this animator now and I can duplicate it. So it duplicates the position property. It also duplicates the range selector that we want. So what we are going to do is we're just going to delete these for the moment. We're going to delete these keyframes that we put on the range selector. But now instead of working with a position value that is instead of working with a particular position value that is vertical, we're actually going to work with a position value that's horizontal. So keep your eyes down here and I'll show you. Now I've changed this position value to something that's off the screen like this. And now I'm going to actually fade that on from start to finish. So you can bring it in reverse order like that, but probably the thing that you'll want to do is you'll probably want to bring it off like this. So consider maybe how you can do that backwards. So let it wait for a minute so we can read the text, and now I'm actually going to keyframe the start of this range selector so that it will shuffle off the side like so, right? All right, so let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Yeah, not too bad, right? So the text comes on letter by letter up here, and then this is our first animator, right? And then we can read the text, and then it flies off the side. This is our second animator taking effect. So you can apply multiple animators to things. So maybe I also want to apply a rotation animator to it, right? So if we want to get really fancy, you can combine these. And there's different presets that they offer up that do different combinations of these things. So maybe hang on here. I can apply a rotation aspect to that one, but that's not the animator I want to apply to. I want to actually do a new animator on this one text. So hang tight here. I'm going to animate the text. I'm going to animate the rotation. And now it's added a third animator in here. So maybe as these letters come in from the bottom, or maybe actually if they go off to the side here, it might look pretty cool if I rotate them. If you can even notice it, we'll find out. So why don't I go ahead and I rotate them this way. And I kind of show them rotating off to the side there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate this range selector now so that it matches up a little bit better with this up here. So let's pull those keyframes down so we have a point of reference and we can see start and end. So I believe, yeah. It's a little bit tough to see. Let's go ahead and take these individual keyframes. I'm going to shift select them. And let me bring this up just a little bit so you can see it better. I'm going to shift select these keyframes, and I'm going to stretch them out a little bit. And this is really part of the creative process and designing and tweaking and getting it so that it looks right. And you can see that these are kind of flying off to the side individually, right? Right? Pretty fun. So you can apply multiple ones at the same time to kind of give them a different effect. You can make them vibrate, you can make them blur, you can make them do all kinds of different things. So, but that's just a basic primer and some basic options for how you can go ahead and apply individual keyframing to different, to individual letters in a typographic sequence.